Sure, people have fancier names for it, but all across the globe internationally, April 20th is celebrated. Marijuana, weed, ganja, whatever you want to call it. This is a day dedicated to that herb, that plant, and we're going to talk about it today. Welcome to a special broadcast, More Than Green, the color of cannabis. And for the next 2 hours, that's what we're going to be talking about. Cannabis, the greenness of it, both green in its properties, its physical nature, but also green as it relates to the impact on Earth, but also green as it relates to the economy, the money. And that's what we're going to dive into today, the color of cannabis and its impact on the black community in its many and myriad forms. This special broadcast is officially entitled More Than Green, the color of cannabis. And it's divided into two segments. We're going to have an informal conversation between three brothers, myself, Brother Tauhid Chappell, and Brother Tayyib Smith. And we're going to talk about the black community's thoughts around cannabis. And then in the second hour, from 2 to 3, we'll be joined in a more formalized panel discussion. Joining us will be Roz McCarthy. Joining us will be Kristal Bush. Joining us will be Jim Seaburg, and joining us will be Senator Sharif Street as we talk about the legal, economic, cultural aspects of cannabis. We'll make time for you as well at some point during this dialogue. But to get right into it, I'm asking you, join us live stream www.wurdradio.com. You can also join us by Facebook Live, digital media, social media platforms, simply typing FORWURD, FORWURD, or at WURD Radio. You can get to us. And you could also listen to us live, 96.1 FM, 900 AM on your radio. If you know anybody around you that's into weed, not into weed, thinking about getting into the economics of weed, the illegal side of it, the legal side of it, all of that stuff we're going to make sense of during our dialogue today. So I'm going to tell you, spread the word, let people know. For the next 2 hours on WURD Radio, we will be talking about marijuana, Mary Jane, weed, cannabis. We're going to talk about CBD, THC, all of the ABCs and the alphabets of this most iconic plant. It is literally a piece of nature growing out of the ground in many climates across the world. And this plant might become as important and powerful in the world as 5G. When you're talking about economics and people looking at opportunities and where to invest capital, we got cryptocurrency, we got 5G, we got AI, and we have weed. That's how important this little plant has become in the political, economic sphere of our reality. So to help us make sense of all this, I want to call forward two brothers, Tauhid Chappell and Tayyib Smith, to begin our conversation. Tayyib, Tauhid, are you with us?
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right.
This is Tayyib.
Happy 420, y'all.
All right. I don't see either of you on the screen, but I hear both of you, so I'm assuming you are with us. So what I want to do is take a little bit of time right now. I see you all coming up right now. So I want each of you to take some time to introduce yourselves. And for the sake of our audio audience, I want to make sure I'm finding a way to differentiate your names because they're so close. So I'm going to go out of my way to accent the last letter. I'm going to do my best. So I will start with Tayyib. Introduce yourself to our listening audience.
Thank you for that. My name is Tayyib Smith. I'm a third-generation Philadelphian, a business owner, someone who is civically engaged. And today I'm representing All Together Now PA, which is a nonprofit founded by my good friend Judy Wicks. And we advocate for sustainable and equitable business ecosystems between urban and rural communities.
All right, that sounds very interesting. Before I go to Tauhid, tell me how we can take what you just said which I understand the words of it, but related to marijuana and this conversation about cannabis, what does Altogether PA and this idea of ecosystems and equity have to do with this conversation about cannabis?
Excellent question. So, as people of African descent, there have been untold industries created on our blood, sweat, and tears and our labor. And the cannabis economy, I think, is on pace to be about a $3.5 billion economic engine for the state of Pennsylvania once it becomes recreational. And if you look at the ownership base of cannabis, there are no Black-owned dispensaries, no Black-owned farmers, no Black-owned packaging companies, delivery companies, security companies within this ecosystem. And in addition to that, there are no Pennsylvania-owned cannabis companies. This has become a multi-state, similar to alcohol or tobacco. That this is big business, and I think there's a lot of stereotypes and prejudices that we inherit because of mass incarceration that treats cannabis like a boogeyman thing that we should stay away from. But there are people who are not of African descent who are getting rich, and this is a gold rush that we are left out of. So and I'll just say one more thing. Me, as someone who's a cannabis user, as someone who's a business owner, and someone who's civically engaged, I think it's imperative that we educate people about what we're being kept of with some level of intentionality.
Okay, and we're going to, that's the purpose for our next 2 hours, 1 hour with you brothers, but 2 hours overall, and guaranteed to go further, because this is a major conversation that I think we need to deep dive in the Black community, the good, the bad, the ugly, the potential, the utopic and dystopic potentialities of all of this. So this is what we're going to dive into today. So pleasure to meet you, my brother, or see you again. I've seen you before, but Brother Tauhid, this will be my first time meeting you. So introduce yourself to our listening audience and tell us what brings you to this dialogue.
Hello, everyone. Tauhid Chappell, pronouns he, him. Born and raised in South Jersey in Sicklerville, so Philly was always in my backyard. I bleed green for the Eagles. Shout out to the Eagles. Shout out to Jalen Hurts securing the bag.
That's right.
But I'm a medical marijuana patient by entry into the cannabis space. I suffer from an autoimmune deficiency disorder called ulcerative colitis, which is part of the IBD Crohn's disease family. That was my entry point. When I became a medical marijuana patient for the first time in 2012, I was living in Arizona working for a TV station. And that was my first entry point to understanding that cannabis was more than just some sort of fun party drug that you were passing around at a party, that it was actually a medicinal herb. And through that entry point, that discovery, I just started using my journalism skills to do research behind the war on drugs, the research behind cannabis prohibition. Why did this plant, which just so happens to naturally grow all around the world, why was it suddenly prohibited? Right. And through that education, like Tayyib mentioned, through that education and talking with people who worked in the ongoing legalizing space in the industry, I began to start seeing the injustices, the ongoing injustices, and the ongoing inequities that we continue to see in this multi-billion-dollar market. Like Tayyib said, Black and brown people were specifically targeted for incarceration for this plant. And now the same people who have been unjustly incarcerated for this plant can no longer even participate or have access to participate in this industry. And that's kind of messed up. And so I'm here to help inform people. I'm here to change the narrative. And I'm here to tell people that this is not a dangerous narcotic that we have been subjected to decades of misinformation about. Right. In fact, cannabis was a legal tincture in the American pharmacopoeia up until the 1940s. This was a legitimate medicine that was completely backed and supported by physicians and doctors that were given to patients. And now we're finally seeing a nice reversal finally coming out of prohibition and coming back into the light. So I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to have this conversation because education is key, and I think that will empower us to become more active, civically engaged in this industry.
So let me just introduce myself a little bit into this. We're going to have an informal conversation, but I also, want to participate not as a moderator. I'll be more of an official moderator in the second hour when we have the panel discussion. So I see this as three brothers. If we were around the fire passing, you all would be puff puff. I'd be the pass dude. I'm neither recreational nor a medical user, though I have respect for it. And I will say a growing respect. I grew up in a household that trafficked in the substance that we're talking about. It was a major part of my childhood growing up. The good, the bad, and the ugly of it. So it's not something that I've jumped into readily. I've on occasion tried it. It doesn't have the impact on me for some reason. So it's not something that I am for or against in either way. But I also want to make space, since we're talking about black communities' thoughts about cannabis. I want to make space for that in the dialogue as well. So I'm just interested in, let's go back. You use the word, Tayyib, gold rush. And then at the same time, so as we talk about it from the potential of what's there, I like that frame of the gold rush, because in many ways it's like that. It's being marketed in many ways like that. But at the same time, you both mentioned, and Brother Tauhid mentioned this issue of early on it became criminalized in a particular way. Talk about, and I'll come back to you, I'll come to you on this, Tauhid. Talk about that criminalization of what in many ways is a very, by some accounts, benign plant. How did it become demonized? Why did it become criminalized, and particularly targeted in this criminalization?
Yeah, so there's multiple factors, and to kind of give it, to tie it all together, drug prohibition, in which marijuana prohibition is nested under that, drug prohibition started as a way to destabilize different communities who are not white. You had, early on during the gold rush era, you had Chinese immigrants who were coming in to help pan for gold, building the railroads. They came in and they were using opium. And people were scared about the dangerous effects of opium, how it was debasing white women and completely causing people to go madly insane. And so you had laws that were utilized to prohibit opium and basically destabilize and incarcerate Chinese immigrants for using this drug that wasn't really hurting anybody. Fast forward, you had the Mexican Revolution happening in the South, and you had a bunch of people from Mexico fleeing the state during the Civil War, coming up into what we now know as Texas, and through those areas, and they happened to bring this plant that they were using that they called marijuana. And people were not liking the new influx of immigrants coming in from the South that were bringing in this mysterious narcotic that was making them lazy and not working and all that stuff. Little did they know that marijuana was the same thing called cannabis sativa that was actually being prescribed as medicine. So there was a disconnect in information. And then you had the debasing of black communities with cocaine in the South, and using drug prohibitionist laws to incarcerate black people for cocaine and marijuana. And you had different government officials who, on the record, were racist, utilizing these drugs as a way to lock people up. You had people like Harry Anslinger pointing out that marijuana was causing people to go wild and rape white women and debasing our communities. And so we have to lock people up and have these tough on drug crimes. And then fast forward, that rhetoric continued to spread, and it became part of the Republican base. You had people like Richard Nixon, who utilized the war on drugs to talk about how he can incarcerate not just black and brown people, but people who are specifically anti-war who happen to be using the plant as well. Right. And so there's an awesome article in Harper's Magazine that is called Legalize It All. And there is a high government official that worked with Richard Nixon that basically was put on the record that said, we knew we could not target black people specifically to put them in jail, but we could look at the anti-war people who are using this drug and target them at the same time. And if we can incarcerate them for this drug, we can remove them from the anti-war, and we could disappear them from society forever. And so that's how we started disappearing people, was through this plan. And so you had, through this culmination of generational misunderstanding of drugs, this reactive racist rhetoric situationally attack and basically destabilize Chinese immigrants, Mexican immigrants, and Black communities all at the same time. And so we've had this culmination of policy and politics that have led us to cannabis prohibition. And I'm happy to finally start living in a world where we're coming to our senses. And that's why we have to continue to talk about the history of it, talk about where the plant came from, what it went through, and what needs to happen to address the harms on our communities.
So before I shift to Tayyib to talk about picking it up from there and moving forward, you use the word misunderstanding, but it seems that there's more of a misinformation than misunderstanding. Do you agree with that characterization? Because as you take us through that evolution, talking about heroin, opium, all the way up through crack, cocaine, marijuana, the people who prescribe against it, in many ways behind them, either they themselves or members of their families have prospered and gained their wealth through the trafficking of the very substances that they created and deemed illegal. So I'm not sure there's a misunderstanding as much as it is misinformation. Just your thoughts about that.
I'll say that it's both. I think misinformation peddled by politicians in power to spread fear and rally communities, specifically white communities, to pressure their lawmakers to pass tough on crime, tough on drug laws.
Gotcha.
Misunderstanding because the media and journalists were credulous. They did not do the due diligence of talking to different doctors, to medical patients, doing their history research and analysis to combat and to intervene and challenge this rhetoric from government officials. And because they didn't understand and they did not seem to challenge the government officials, they were able to kind of act as a stenographer to spread this misinformation. Gotcha. And so I do put it on the media, I do put it on journalists, which is a predominantly white industry, and not doing their jobs in challenging this drug rhetoric that we now know was all untrue. Okay. So misinformation from government, misunderstanding by the public, it's a combination, in my opinion.
Gotcha. I appreciate that. So for that historical backdrop, I just wanted to set the context. Now I want to shift to you, Tayyib. You used the phrase gold rush. Talk about it for those of us who might not be as familiar with the economic, or what I call the political economic machinations and the opportunities that are being created now, the legitimization and legalization of this quote-unquote drug, such that now there's a burgeoning economy, a legal sector economy that is emerging around what people now call cannabis. They no longer necessarily say weed or marijuana. All of a sudden it's cannabis. And so talk a little bit about that, both the linguistics of how the way we refer to this substance has changed because it's becoming legal, and what are the gold rush opportunities that you foresee, particularly for Black people in this space?
So thank you for that. When I use the analogy gold rush, the first thing that comes to mind, there was an article in Billy Penn, I think about a year and a half ago, that described the death of fast food restaurants and diners and the proliferation of cannabis dispensaries in Center City. So I think there's only like one or two places where you can get a Happy Meal in the city of Philadelphia anymore, outside of maybe a couple McDonald's up in North Philadelphia. But if you look at Center City proper, there are a plethora of cannabis dispensaries. And that, last weekend, my wife and I went to Manhattan, and I was shocked and awed by the number of cannabis dispensary stores. Like in Manhattan, it seemed to be 2 or 3 on every block when you went between 30th Street and, let's say, Midtown. Right. And within that industry, there's just numerous people who are making a very good living. Right. And I have to tie that back to mass incarceration, because all over this nation, there were young men and women who were stopped and searched for a dime bag, who then gave, tens of years stolen away from their families. And to me, that's representative, or almost an analogy of the 10 million people who were disappeared from Africa and became, property of the United States, and then created the cotton industry, the tobacco industry, the banking industry, the investment industry. And if I think contemporarily, there are not that many new industries where there's going to be that level of growth, right? So you asked me, about the opportunity for Black and brown people. If I'm going to be frank, I see temporarily very few spaces, particularly for small entrepreneurs or small business people, to have an entry level into the cannabis industry. And that's why at Altogether Now PA and a project we call P3, which stands for Profits for PA, we're actually advocating from our state representatives to create legislations to make a more equitable ecosystem for business, right? And that goes from small farmers to dispensaries to the people who are picking and cutting. There has to be spaces where we actually have ownership and equity, and that should be legislated. Because if not, we will be left behind once again.
So let's start there. I've pushed this issue. I'm an economist by schooling, and I tell people one of the challenges I have with the way that Black people talk about business and money and wealth and economics is we always talk about it as if economics is just finance. But the field is called political economics. And it's because there is a symbiotic relationship between legislation and politics and the creation of markets and market opportunities. So can we talk about the politics of the cannabis industry right now? What has to happen? What do we as Black people need to be vigilant about politically in order to create a space of potential equity in this emerging cannabis market? What are some of the issues? You mentioned about, just the fact that many men and women in our population have been criminalized as a result of their intersection with cannabis, right? Whether you had a dime bag, some people are doing time as a result. But there are also some things that are very prohibitive about our ability to get into the market equitably without legislation that protects in many ways or creates in many ways on-ramps to this economic opportunity. Can you both talk about the politics of the economics of cannabis? Let's start with you, Tauhid.
Well, the politics around the economics is that we, unfortunately, are subjected to a capitalistic, exploitive industry and society. And so naturally you have people who are coming into this space, one, with no background history or even understanding of this plan. All they see is dollars and money signs. And predominantly these are rich, generally older, bringing up these cannabis lights. Once they become, they want money, they want profits, they want to focus on their bottom line, and they don't care how they decide to get it. They're not using the money that they're generating to put back into Black communities that have been completely destabilized by over-policing and the war on drugs. They're using it to line their pockets and expand their market share. And so this is a very political issue, and it is up to us to continue to inform our communities and to also give them guidance and help direct them on how we can utilize our power to make sure that the laws that are put in place allow for the most accessible opportunities for people to start the business in the industry. And whether or not you want to be a plant-touching business or not, everyone should have an opportunity to participate in any way, shape, or form, void of any sort of repercussions, rather, that, exudes around incarceration or any sort of police activity. So the economics behind it are political. We are continuing to see market shares being grabbed up from these multi-state operators that, again, don't come from our communities. In fact, in Pennsylvania, the majority of medical marijuana dispensaries and grower processors are owned by companies that are not even local from Pennsylvania. They are all out of state. And so that speaks volumes to the people that are involved in this industry. And so it is up to us to really, again, educate, inform, change the narrative, and then politically mobilize and organize so that we get our lawmakers, the people who represent us, to write the policies to enable us to access the industry on our own terms and not the terms of these capitalists.
Your thoughts about that, Tayyib?
So you started the question with what we should demand of our political representatives, and there's a phrase I've heard is called File 13, and I would say in File 13 being the trash. If there's a new request for proposal, if there's a new economic opportunity to get distribution rights, particularly when the state goes recreational. If you do not have a plan for equity in terms of ownership, hiring within your business model, it should go into the trash. And I think from state representative to governor.
Let me ask you a quick question, Tayyib, because you're in business deeply. There's this sense that affirmative action quotas are illegal. Talk a little bit, help us over, because I've heard so many black people use that as a reason to not advocate for what you're saying, like hiring or contract levels. Like, tease that out for us, because I know a lot of people who become apolitical because they are in their mind say that affirmative action quotas are illegal, and therefore they don't understand that you could fight for these legislative inclusions around equity in certain economic opportunities.
Oh, that's deep. So, there's a political naivete that makes people believe that you can live well and prosper in the United States and not have civic or political representation. And I think that works to the benefit of white supremacy. For me, the only affirmative action that has ever existed in the United States has been for white men primarily, and white women probably starting in the 60s and 70s. So I cannot imagine how we are going to move forward without a social, political, and economic infrastructure that is genuinely representative. And I feel like that political engagement has waned with our youth. I think a lot of people are weary and tired, but we have to re-engage with political systems, because the one thing big business is always doing is talking to politics, if not writing the policy and actually handing it to representatives to deliver. And if you do believe that you can live well and prosper in the United States without some level of political representation, I don't care who I'm talking to, I'm going to say that you are naive.
Okay. So
now, I want to jump in real quick too, just
sure.
to add on to that, is that advocates are looking at ways to not directly use that language of affirmative action to address equity within the cannabis space, but rather they are using language and policies and laws and regulations to hold prospective businesses accountable for how they're going to engage in the industry from an equitable lens. Now, this isn't accessible, unfortunately, but in Pennsylvania, for example, medical marijuana companies, when they were applying for a license, they all had to submit some sort of diversity plan. How are they going to actually address diversity within their company? And they were given points and rated based on the strength of their diversity plan. Right. Coincidentally, though, when you try to pull up these documents, which are on public record, most of that diversity plans are redacted, unfortunately, so you can't really see what these companies actually said they're going to do. But there is a level of accountability there that the Department of Health could do if they wanted to. Other states are trying to put that type of language in with labor peace agreements, unionizing shops, making sure that unions have a strong representation in the space as well, so that there is a good level of diverse hiring within the industry through the supply chain. So I do see advocates trying to get they're trying to use language in a way where, lawsuits don't have to come up, and we don't have to necessarily say this is affirmative action. But the way that the industry plays out, you can tell that the intention behind it is to help people who have been formerly incarcerated get into the industry in some way, shape, or form.
So let's dive in here. I'm curious. I've heard this moment marketed in many ways as probably as close to a reparations opportunity as black folks might get. I'm just wondering both of your thoughts about that. I see your face, Tayyib, but I've heard people kind of talk about this opportunity, this gold rush opportunity that you mentioned as a form of reparations. So I'm just wondering, I'll start with you since your face is so clearly puzzled by that statement. Just your thoughts about a statement like that.
Honestly, well, first I have to say, today I'm in Montgomery, Alabama with the team from Altogether Now PA, and I just left my group, and I was at the Equal Justice Initiative.
Ah, cool.
Just kind of examining the history of our condition in let's say, this hemisphere. And when I think of this issue being conflated with reparations, that weighs very heavy on me.
Right.
Because on so many levels, whether it's the medical field, education, job opportunities, investment in our communities, there's a lack of imagination for us to ever be right-sized or ever receive restitution. And there have been, all kinds of communities around the world, from the Jewish community to Japanese people who were interned. Reparations has occurred, but there is a lack of frankly, courage and imagination writ large, Black and white people, when we're talking about making Black people whole.
Right.
And we're still living in a condition. There are all kinds of ways that we put lipstick on a pig to say, here's a job, or here's a little opportunity, or here's a corporate pittance for that to invest in your business that is not going to get you past 30 days. But we do not have the long-term imagination and dedication to making our people whole, and that saddens me. I don't think that the cannabis space is where we should get our reparations. I think we have to have more courage and longevity to fight for the type of legislation and investment.
Appreciate that view. Tauhid.
Yeah, I see opportunities for reparations. I do see that different municipalities and states are trying to get creative with good intentions on how to use the cannabis tax revenue that is Evanston, Illinois kind of comes to mind on how they are trying to utilize some of their local cannabis tax revenue to help people with housing. And so I think there are creative ways, but I completely agree with Tayyib. We have to really push the level of imagination. And I think that we're not going to truly see the type of reparations that we hope from the cannabis space until the people who have been directly impacted by incarceration, their families and communities have been destabilized, are at the table writing the policy, writing the language, and completely addressing how they want the money to be allocated to help address them, their communities, and the people that have been harmed. So we don't have enough of those people on the table. We need more people from that space to be at the table, and that's what we're really fighting for, so that they know they have the voice and they have the power to do that.
Right. In my political or different activist work, one of the things I find is it becomes more difficult to galvanize Black people when we're troubled by the issue. So, for example, I find that around the issue of reentry and incarceration, right? I find that if people are troubled by the fact that you were incarcerated, there's this assumption that you did something wrong, and therefore it's hard to galvanize them to the level of political engagement when you're clean, right? We know from the civil rights movement, you being in Alabama right now, like they were very strategic about getting to Rosa Parks because several young women before her, they were either teenage mothers. They weren't as clean as Rosa was, such that when everybody galvanized around her, you didn't have to worry about any skeletons in her closet. And I find like our people have a moral kind of compass that sometimes prohibits us from fully engaging into these moments. So what I want to do is I want to ask each of you, marijuana was systematically demonized as an entity. What would you do? Because I think that's where we need to start. We need to really undemonize what was systematically demonized, and this thing called marijuana, this plant called cannabis or whatever, has had that. There's been an inordinate propaganda campaign to make this thing a boogeyman. How would you go about teaching people that no, this is not what you think it is. This is not what it's been made out to be or framed to be, because I think that's an important entry point to get people more politically and economically involved in the opportunity or the situation as it's coming forward. So I'm gonna start with you, Tayyib, because I see that look on your face again. So I'm curious as to what your thoughts are about that.
Well, I'm trying to stay on course in regards to speaking about cannabis, but when you said that, it made me just think of our intergenerational challenges with identity politics.
Mm-hmm.
And, when I think of the marketing of weed, or I can remember films from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, where it's a funny ha-ha when
Right.
a white kids are using weed or frat boys are using weed. People can get stopped, they can make it home safely. But if you live in the wrong zip code, if you live in a red line community and you're stopped and searched, having a bit of cannabis in your book bag could change the trajectory of your life.
Yes.
And I think, all of us live within we're swimming in an infrastructure of white supremacy. And sometimes our very own look to people who have, suffered in life with this lens of identity politics. So when you mentioned those women before Rosa Parks, who ironically I just saw pictures of today, it makes me sad that you have to be almost perfect to be considered to have civil and civic and human rights. And I think we have to give we have to give each other some level of grace. And I think we have to stop looking at Black people with a white gaze. I think many of our elders, that was put upon them, and now we are putting that on new generations of people. And at some point, we have to have a jubilee and a forgiveness and just understand what our collective condition is and, be free.
Right. Tauhid, anything to add to that sentiment?
No, that was, well said. We have to bring more empathy to the discussion. The people closest to the harm caused by cannabis prohibition, they're not going to be perfect people. None of us are perfect people. None of us are. We're doing our best. And so I think we have to bring a lot of empathy. We have to bring a lot of patience. And, the one thing that I think when we talk about kind of shifting the narrative, we now have a lot of access to different types of information that can hopefully help change the consciousness around cannabis and not, continue to stigmatize it or demonize it. I'm just going to give a shout out to a couple books that were instrumental for me in kind of radicalizing my thoughts on the industry. Marijuana Reconsidered, Smoke Signals, and A New Leaf. 3 books. If you can find them, they typically can be found online or at a library. Get your hands on them and have fun down the rabbit hole, because your whole mind will be changed from that. Yeah. Trust me.
Give me a quick, let's say out loud, I want each of you to say out loud something that we should, as people now, consider about cannabis positively that goes against the narrative we've been fed. So if I don't get a chance to read the books, Tauhid, what would you say what did you pull from your changing in perception? Because I think that's very important. I think that us working with our people, because we've been inundated with this thing as a problem, weed as a problem for so long, weed as criminal, we associate it to a particular lifestyle, a particular group of people. Say something that says, okay, y'all, think again about this, because all of that is part of a marketing ploy, and we now need to remarket our mindset around this particular thing. What would each of you offer into that space?
Tayyib?
One thing I didn't mention in the beginning of this when I was introducing myself, that I worked at a medical marijuana dispensary in Philadelphia, the second shop to open up in the city, and I've worked with hundreds of patients, people suffering from all sorts of ailments, from cancer to MS to IBD. And the people who came in first as patients, were very shocked to find out that this plant, at the very end of the day, this plant has always been medicine. It has always been medicinal. There are positive benefits that it brings to you when you consume it in a safe, regulated, and educated manner. And so, one of the things that I am very happy to see is that, you mentioned if you can't get access to the books, but you want to find credible messengers and people who are actually trying to give you the proper information. There are some other groups I'm going to shout out to that if you look them up and connect with them, they will give you the resources. They will have you can talk with people who have been inside and outside the industry. Americans for Safe Access is a great organization. Doctors for Cannabis Regulation is a great organization. Drug Policy Alliance is a great resource. All of these different organizations and groups are working to not only destigmatize cannabis, but make sure that this information is accessible so that people understand at the very end of the day, this plant has always been medicinal. It's always been okay and safe to use. And now we can hopefully feel more comfortable stepping out of the shadows and talking about the positive impacts it's had to our lives. And I know a lot of patients that I served at the dispensary, the more they began to inform themselves on the medicinal aspect of the plants, they became more confident in talking about it. They became more confident in being transparent about not just cannabis use, but the actual illnesses that they were using cannabis for to treat and help mitigate their pain. And so they felt empowered with that information, that education. So again, it ties it back to education. Educate yourself, inform yourself, and then spread that information to your communities and the people that you think would be beneficial to it.
Got you. What would your remarketing pitch sound like, Tayyib?
I probably wouldn't be the best person to come up with talking points, but I'll just say to that, I didn't grow up with the negative connotation of marijuana. Both my parents were activists. They were in Black nationalist spaces. They were around jazz musicians and painters. I never got the boogeyman perspective. On marijuana, and I empathize with people.
Yeah, see, I've been a part of drug raids and having your house run through and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, but whenever I hear someone talk about that, I think of the times I've spent in predominantly white universities. I've never seen a drug raid at Drexel or Penn, but I know a lot of people who sold weed who were white at the universities and went on to go into banking, into tech, into private finance. For a little while, I lived out in Boulder, Colorado, and I never saw a drug raid on a white house.
I never saw more cocaine used than during the lunch break when I worked on Wall Street when I was interning. Like, they go stand by that Merrill Lynch bull, and all they was doing is lines of coke during the lunch break. So
to go back to like your framing of marketing, there's always a catch-22 to or finding a reason to criminalize us doing the very same things that our white neighbors do on a daily basis.
So let me share one of my concerns with each of you, and I would want you to weigh in. I look at this moment, let's call it the gold rush moment that Tayyib has introduced, and I immediately think back to black people and tobacco. I think back to black people and alcohol. I think back to black people and the lottery and running numbers, and how in many ways those things were a part of our economic reality. I mean, I know some people who made some serious come-ups in those industries, and then those industries get legalized and regulated. And somehow what was a source of wealth for us, proud source of wealth back in the day, moonshining, running numbers, growing tobacco, those things now disappear. And the wealth opportunity shifts. It goes from us, it gets criminalized when we're doing it, and now it becomes legal and legitimate and a source of billions of dollars for quote-unquote mainstream white America. And my fear right now is that if we don't engage politically and put up the safeguards and the barriers, what happened to us with tobacco, what happened to us with alcohol, what happened to us with the lottery is going to happen to us with cannabis. How do we mitigate that this time around? Let's dive deep into that, because I think that for me is a core issue of the moment that we find ourselves in. Let's start with you, Tauhid.
Yes. Three things come to mind. One, which altogether now PA is really pushing for, is and something that I completely support, is making sure that small business owners, entrepreneurs, mom and pops, specifically Black, Indigenous, Latino, minority-owned businesses can have access to the capital, the retail, and the technical and political infrastructure space to build their business. The second thing that happens is we need to start looking at cooperative economics and cooperatives. Massachusetts is one of the very few states that actually has a specific cannabis license for cooperatives. And so if you are a farming cooperative, you can get a license and work together as a cooperative to kind of create that economy. And then the third thing that I always say is that you should always have, in Pennsylvania, I hope does this, you should always allow for home grow. People who want to be able to grow their own medicine and not have to go to a dispensary or have to pay into the industry can still be able to benefit from the plant. And in places like DC, they've even taken it a step further where you can grow your own cannabis and then even have the access to kind of gift it or create some sort of sale, almost like you're at a farm stand, at a farmer's market, and be able to kind of give that. So people can still continue to participate in the economy without feeling like they have to put in millions of dollars to get their business storefront up and running, without having to go to white investors and feel the pain of being under a capitalistic structure. Cooperatives, small mom and pop shops, and growing your own I think are three critical things that will enable people to participate in the industry without having to necessarily spend all their hard work, all their hard money to get a license in a very volatile market. Those are the three things I would advocate for.
Appreciate that. Tayyib.
I mean, I can't, I just doubled down on everything Tauhid said. Those are excellent talking points. I can't do better.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's scale this back. I'm curious as to why now it's called cannabis. I think that's a marketing issue, but that's just me. Like, why won't we talk about marijuana? Now it's cannabis. And within that, for people who might be new to this conversation, can you break down the TCH versus the CBD stuff and the products that we're talking about when we talk about the cannabis industry? Because I know it's now more than just somebody getting some weed and smoking it, right? There are so many products now within this umbrella of the cannabis industry field. So can one or both of you take some time and just give us the 101 of the cannabis economy and the products and, I would dare say, services that economy constitutes?
So I'll jump in and just speak to what you said about the naming. I think that's just the evolution of the space because it's becoming professionalized. I mean, you have hospital systems and healthcare companies that are in partnership with cannabis companies,
right?
And I think marijuana, weed, the slang of it is just I guess elevating, but into differentiating between THC and the other uses, because I really consider Tauhid to be our regional expert in this space. I'm going to defer to him.
Okay, before you defer to him, though, you are the you're a self-avowed recreational user. So at least my understanding is that's where the THC side of the equation is more important on the recreational side, because you're seeking an experience. And I understand that the cannabis or the CBD side is where the more medical oriented stuff comes in. Am I mistaken in that understanding? But if I'm correct, then talk a little bit about it from the recreational side, because one of the things we're not talking about.
Technically, I have a medical. I have a medical subscription in the state of Pennsylvania.
Okay.
None of us are recreational as of yet.
Right.
The policies that are coming down the line.
Right.
It is proposed that within a year or 2 years, Pennsylvania will be a recreational state.
Gotcha.
And I believe Governor Shapiro has already said that he supports that idea. Right.
So I'm gonna come back to you at the end, Tayyib, because for me also, I believe that's where most people see the potential economic boom coming in. So I want to close on that particular conversation as Pennsylvania is shifting potentially to a more recreational and medical use state. What are the things that we need to prepare for and advocate for in that context? Because that's where I believe the gold rush opportunity is really going to be. So let's come over to you, Tauhid, and let's pick up from there. Let's pick up on the medical side. Just give us that breakdown a little bit, because most people hear the word, but we don't know necessarily the science or the elements. So give us the 101 of cannabis and why it's something that people look to use now, and more particularly the different forms. When you walk into a CBD store, there's a lot of stuff that's in there. It's more than just a plant that we call marijuana.
Yeah, so for some historical perspective, there was a bunch of different botanists, taxonomists who quote unquote discovered cannabis, and they gave it different names. You have Carl Linnaeus in 1753 deemed the cannabis plant Cannabis sativa L. Then you had someone else find cannabis or discover cannabis, another European botanist, I believe, and they called it Cannabis indica. And then you had another one who found cannabis and was like, this is called Cannabis ruderalis. And so you kind of had these shifting taxonomies of cannabis, which were all the same plant, just happened to be growing in different regions and having different types of physical properties. And like I'd mentioned, during the Mexican Revolution, Mexican people called cannabis marijuana. And so it was the same thing. They just called it a different name. And so when they moved up and immigrated away from Mexico during the Mexican Revolution, they were using the word marijuana, even though it was the same plant that had been labeled Cannabis sativa L in the American Pharmacopoeia. So again, we were talking about the same plant. And let's also talk about hemp real quick. Hemp is also cannabis. It just so happens to have less percentage of THC that is federally legal compared to the other THC, higher THC of marijuana and cannabis.
Gotcha.
So we're talking about the same plant here. There's just different terminologies. Weed, pot, reefer, devil's grass, it's all the same plant. So Cannabis sativa L, Cannabis indica, marijuana, it's all the same plant. So let's start with that. Second thing is, from a medical perspective, you do have, when patients came into the dispensary, they were like, can I get an indica? Can I get a sativa? Can I get a hybrid? First off, cannabis is a hybrid through and through. This plant has been crossbred for hundreds of thousands of years now. There's not, for you to find a pure sativa plant is very difficult. A lot of these flowers are hybrid in their mix.
Gotcha.
Sativa plants tend to be a little bit taller and thinner leaves in their growth. Indica plants tend to be a little bit shorter and shrubberier in their physical properties, but the actual breakdown of these flowers have been crossbred for so long that most of these plants are hybrid. So when patients came in and they're like, can I get an indica sativa or a hybrid? I would be like, listen, that's a good entry point, but let's get behind the chemistry of this plant. This plant, THC, CBD are cannabinoids, right? They are chemical compounds that your body metabolizes and ingests and all that. And so they have different impacts and different types of reactions to what is called the endocannabinoid system that everybody has in their body. Even animals have it in their body. So THC is the more psychoactive element that is typically associated with more of a higher, heady feeling. And then you have different cannabinoids like CBD, CBC, CBG that also do different types of functions. CBD has been known to help people with anxiety, and it is non-psychoactive, so you're not going to feel the intensity high of THC. Now, also, when we're talking about the flower and the chemical compounds, there's also terpenes as well, which is they also play a role in how the flower interacts with your body. And terpenes can be found in fruits, vegetables, trees, and all that stuff too. So they also play a role in the effects of cannabis. And what we say with the interactions of different cannabinoids like THC and CBD mixed with these different terpenes like mycene or pinene, we call this the entourage effect. And what you have is, once you digest this plant, you have these chemical compounds working together to create some sort of effect. And now everyone's going to have a little bit of a different feeling with cannabis. You could have, Tayyib and I can smoke the same strain. Right. He might have a little bit of a different effect than I might have a different effect because our bodies might be different.
That's why my friends don't invite me around, because I don't get any effect, and they be buzzed up, and I'm sitting there, so I'm like Debbie Downer because I'm still analytical and logical, and they having a good time, and they don't want me around. I don't know. I don't know if I lost my brother. So what I want to do, Tayyib, is two things. One thing, I want to raise a concern or a question that we can't answer now, but I would love to have this conversation further, and that is, as Tauhid was mentioning, the more we talk about the chemical compounds, I understand then that creates room where you can do a lot with these products in a laboratory and might not need to grow them in the plant form that we're talking about. And I think that in and of itself creates a way of minimizing our participation in an evolving market. As we move into different product forms like gummies or candy or whatever, that you don't necessarily need to grow this from a plant base, then we might not have access to the laboratories where you can produce these things on a large scale, so that economic opportunity dissipates even further. That's a concern that I have as well. But talk about, as we're moving into pushing legislatively Pennsylvania into the recreational side of this, what the economic opportunities and growth opportunities are, and how we begin to advocate for black people to be present and powerful in this evolving sector.
I think we have to stay civically engaged. We have to educate our political representatives. We have to be involved in the writing of public policy. I do disagree that even if something is going to the laboratory, that we can't be involved to have ownership. I think we have to have an expansive imagination about our futures. I think we have to, we have to own everything from cannabis companies to chemical companies.
Right.
If we are not involved in the infrastructure of how our world works, things that are not in our best interest happen to us. So to go back to the public policy, when you're, later today, when you're speaking to one of our senators who's an advocate for this, I think he would agree that the policy that is written has to have an equitable framework for an inclusion of the African American community.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I wasn't intimating that we can't be present. I'm saying that these are things we have to think about as the production moves into something that might be more inside a laboratory. Maybe our HBCUs begin to become more important in how we do experiments and product development and creation and things of that nature. So before we
I believe Cheney University, because it does have a history of agricultural programs, is exploring that. I have the granular details, but I believe some of our HBCUs are pursuing that.
Great. So before we sign off, what ways people can kind of stay engaged with this work, websites, books, emails, whatever the case may be, that you would offer to people as a way of becoming better informed and becoming better engaged, regardless of what you think about this. This is a major political, economic, cultural moment in our community, and we need to have our presence felt. How do we do that?
So for me personally, I would encourage everyone to check out altogetherNowPA.com. That's where our platform for P3, Pot Profits for Pennsylvania, is listed. And again, I really just have to shout out to Tayyib Chappell. He has been a leader and a courageous advocate in this space for many years, and I am proud of him. My friend and colleague, who's also on the board at Altogether Now PA, Sharon Perry Thomas, would be an excellent person and local business owner to follow.
Well, I appreciate you both for joining us today, and I learned a lot about cannabis. Again, our conversation, special broadcast, More Than Green, the color of cannabis. We're talking about it today. When we come back from break, we will be joined by Roz McCarthy, Kristal Bush, Jim Seaburg, and Senator Sharif Street to further our dialogue. Stay tuned.
This is your celebration.
I'm Jonathan Stiles from the Museum of the American Revolution, and I want to wish WURD a happy 20th anniversary. At the Museum of the American Revolution, we believe that a more inclusive history is a more accurate history, and we so appreciate how WURD has allowed us to reach different communities, to share that message, and engage with us in the work that we're doing. So happy birthday, WURD. You're doing incredible work. Thank you so much for how you're serving the Philadelphia community.
Hello, I'm Mark Gaines from New York City, originally from Philadelphia, and I want to wish WURD a happy 20th anniversary. This is an amazing accomplishment and something that I think the community really needs, and something that will build a foundation for generations to come. I stand with WURD on the 20th anniversary now and forever, and future anniversaries to come. Special shout out to Sarah Lomax, who is continuing this legacy of my grandfather, and I hope to someday be a part of it, help WURD grow as well. Again, congrats. Congratulations.
We're celebrating 20 years of progressive Black talk media.
And welcome back. Good afternoon. Welcome back to the second part of our conversation, More Than Green, the Color of Cannabis. Thank you to our sponsor, True Leave, and we will continue our dialogue. By the way, if you want more information, go to our website, WURDradio.com/4-20 to get information, to follow up, to learn more, to become politically and economically more engaged in this dialogue. That would be the place for you to go. So again, thank you to our sponsor, True Leave, and go to our website, WURDradio.com/4-20 for more information. So welcome to part 2 of our conversation. We're going to have a panel discussion, y'all. We have 4 people who can give us more information than we ever wanted to know about this particular conversation. And in my mind, we're going to talk about the politics in Pennsylvania of pot, both the profits and the perils, y'all, because we as a community need to know. So we sent out the bat signal for important people to come educate us a little bit more about this important conversation. So we're joined by Roz McCarthy, Kristal Bush, Jim Seaburg, and from Senator Sharif Street's office, J. Desmond McKinson. Now, if I were to read all of your bios, it would take up all of our time together. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to ask each of you briefly to introduce yourself, and then also tell us as concisely as possible from where you sit why this issue is important for us today as Pennsylvanians, and in particular Black Pennsylvanians in the city of Philadelphia. So I will start with you, Roz McCarthy. Greetings and welcome to our conversation.
Good afternoon. Happy 420 to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
We're good?
Yes, we're
All right.
good.
Awesome. So first and foremost, thank you for having me on. And if you see me in my car, I'm sorry. Normally I would be somewhere where it's nice and quiet, but I'm actually in D.C. right now. And we've been advocating on the Hill for the last 3 days for federal sensible cannabis policy reform. So this conversation is so important at the federal level as well as the state. I'm Roz McCarthy. I'm the founder and the CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana. And I'm also the founder and CEO of the first Black woman-owned cannabis brand, a multi-state brand that's called Buddah Cannabis, and we are in the state of Pennsylvania. So we are the first Black woman-owned brand in this beautiful state. So I'm so thankful to be here today.
I appreciate you being here, and welcome Jim Seaburg. Who are you and why are you here?
Hey, thanks for having me. Jim Seaburg, I'm the Assistant Director for the Medical Cannabis Research Center at Drexel University. Recently graduated with my master's degree in health management and policy. It's a master's of public health degree. Believe that cannabis is an absolutely necessary tool for a lot of medical patients across Pennsylvania, but also as we look towards transitioning towards adult use cannabis, seeing it as a tremendous opportunity for Pennsylvania to become a leader in restorative justice surrounding this issue, particularly as it comes to repairing the harms from the war on drugs, and then also providing a stable tax income to help communities with mental health issues, things of that nature, to really reinvest in our communities with that tax revenue for the more holistic solution that cannabis can be a part of.
Got you. Kristal Bush, who are you and why are you here?
Yes, thanks for having me. Hi, guys. But throughout my career, I wore many hats. I started off when I graduated from college as a social worker. Then I, led to being a community organizer. And how I entered into this industry was as a cannabis patient. And when I got in as a patient, I started realizing it wasn't a lot of people, especially in my community, that even just knew that they can go and get their medical marijuana card. So I started having these patient pop-up parties at just different secret locations. And I was just, helping people just get their medical marijuana card. And just the more that I've done just on the history of this war on drugs, I realized that it was really designed to, break up, the Black family and to break up our families. So I started even just digging in deeper and looking at the men in my family, looking at their own cases. My father was locked up for 25 years, but then one of his first charges was actually for illegal substance. And that's really what's keeping me in the industry, is to really just be able to correct the harm that was done, So as I'm just educating myself, educating the community, and even just doing community building and organizing people and just helping them understand that the position that we are in right now was because this was the intent. It was supposed to go on like this. And, we can use this cannabis industry as an opportunity to reverse some of that harm. So that's what's keeping me in the industry.
All right. Appreciate it and welcome. And last but not least, Desmond McKinson. Who are you and why are you here?
So I'm comms director for Senator Sharif Street, but I also work on his criminal justice policy, as well as his cannabis policy, which we've been working on for a while now. I don't want to, rehash most of what everybody said in terms of why it's critical this happens. We all know about the history, the war of the racist war on drugs, which has been a war on people. But it's inevitable that the cannabis marketplace is emerging. We've seen it nationally, we've seen it medicinally, and inevitably adult use legislation is going to pass in Pennsylvania. When it does, we just want to make sure that restorative justice is central. We want to make sure that a diverse participation and diverse economic landscape is essential. And we want to make sure that it's done in a way where everyone can participate and nobody is, regulated to, just second-class status when it comes to the cannabis marketplace.
Great. So I'm going to get into the cannabis marketplace a little bit later. My understanding is that Pennsylvania is already a medical use state, advocating or in a legislative process to become a recreational use state as well, and the market opportunities that emanate from that. I want to get into that a little bit later. I want to make sure, and I seem to be in resonance with each of you, that before we talk about the market opportunities, there are justice issues that have to be addressed, because we would hate to move into the market conversation on the backs of people who have been criminalized in many ways unjustly and are serving punitive penalties for something now that some people are going to make billions of dollars off of. So I would like to know from each of your perspectives, how do we heal that harm, the injustice, the legal inequities that have happened to a particular group of people, black people in particular, and now all of a sudden, voila, that's no longer against the law, and we're going to open this up such that everybody or many people can become rich. But I'm concerned that we might do that before we adjust the injustice. So from each of your perspectives, how do we go about that particular issue? Let's start with you, Mr. McKinson.
Well, I mean, the first thing we should do is we should take care of everybody that has, those possession charges now, right? Right now, there's nobody solely serving time in Pennsylvania for purely possession of cannabis. That's ended, but there are people who still do serve a form of incarceration, whether it's e-incarceration, whether it's probation or parole, whether it's upward mobility or a lack of upward mobility, as in terms of accessing education loans, business loans, employment. And there's a way for us to bring relief to those people now. I mean, it'll be nice when we do adult use and we seal and expunge records. But there are ways that the government can do it now. They've done it in some capacities. Governor Wolf had a marijuana expedited clemency program, which our office assisted some people with. It was well-intentioned, but it wasn't executed quite in the way in which it should have been. The critical paraphernalia charge was not included, which really makes up the majority of nonviolent possession and use charges. Someone is usually going to have paraphernalia, whether it's a pipe or a bag or whatever else.
So let me understand. So if I walk into if I walk into a store, right now, there are many stores in my neighborhood where those types of paraphernalia are freely sold. I see it everywhere. Are you saying that there are people in jail right now for possession of that types of paraphernalia and serving time?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is the expedited clemency program we had in Pennsylvania to expunge or seal the records of those with nonviolent low-level possession charges and use charges did not include the paraphernalia portion of the statute, which makes up for the overwhelming majority of those who have those low-level charges. And so whereas thousands of people should have received relief, only a few hundred did. I believe maybe 200 or 300 people did. That's something we can do now, and that's something we believe Lieutenant Governor Austin Davis and the governor, our Governor Chappell, are taking leadership on and saying that they will renew that program and execute it in a more efficient way. So we can do that now. However, when we pass the legislation, the first thing that's critical is that we're talking to people like Jim, like Kristal, like Roz, right? Stakeholders who are already doing the work, who already know the lay of the land, so to speak, in terms of what critical things need to be included in this legislation, not only for restorative justice, but for full participation for our community. And that's one thing, at least our office, Senator Street, has been doing for years. I've been helping him in that regard.
Okay.
Just talking to people and trying to make sure we get it right.
All right. Kristal Bush.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
From your perspective, as we're talking about healing the harm that's been done to large swaths of our community as a result of the way particularly cannabis or marijuana or whatever people want to call it at this point has been criminalized in our communities over time. What's some steps we could take to deal with that issue before we talk about the market opportunity issue?
Yeah, I mean, just to go just deeper to what Desmond had mentioned, one of my issues is I think we focus a lot of the attention just on the person who was locked up for a non-violent offense. But we got to really shed light on, and I know many people who was locked up, for a violent offense, but they were pulled over in a car and the car smelled like marijuana or something like that. So that gave them the probable cause in order to search that car for them to get that violent offense. I think in order for us to move towards more of a healing, we got to address the collateral consequences. A lot of those people who suffered maybe in the 90s, they may have had the nonviolent cannabis charge, but when it was released home, they suffered over 40,000 collateral consequences, whether that was housing, whether that was education, whether that was employment, and it resulted into them going back into this system. So I think we need to start talking to these different systems. So the probation and parole office, we need to start talking to the public housing systems, because a lot of those systems were put in place, and the policies that they followed was to really continue to disrupt the family. Currently right now, and if a person have a violent charge, or if they have any type of charge, or if they're on probation or parole, they can't even be paroled to, one of their loved ones' houses who is receiving public assistance. So I think the different systems need to be educated, from the foster care system to the public housing system, all of these systems that are in place to control and really have a say on keeping these families disconnected. I think once we start educating those different systems, then I think we can work towards more of a healing. But if we're not really going directly to those systems that are put in place to keep the Black family and keep these families disrupted, then we're really just going to be on this wheel, you know. And I just learned that from just being a social worker, from, you know, like just the different hats that I wore. Is a lot of these systems are just, they're put in place, you know, to, you know, remove the children from the mom, you know, if the baby was addicted to cannabis or things like that. So I think we really got to like really start having these conversations with the people that are in charge of these systems that are, you know, put in place to just keep us disrupted.
Roz McCarthy.
Yes.
How do we heal the harm that's currently enacted on many communities before we talk about the economic opportunity? From your perspective, what are some of the things that we need to consider and undertake?
Well, I think I go back to Desmond's point. I was going to jump in and I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think Desmond made such just a critical point. We've seen from a policy standpoint that policy rules the day, and we're not seeing our lawmakers talk to the advocates on the ground and create that think tank to be able to work together for the solutions. And we can walk and chew gum, right? We can create policy on the economics as well as creating policy that also supports the repairing of the social justice. Will it all happen in one fell swoop? No. And that's where I'm pragmatic, maybe because I'm just a little old, but I need to we can't sell people on, like, I can do it and it's going to happen overnight. I think we have to show that we have incremental change and incremental relief so that people can believe and have hope, right? And that we as advocates and as lawmakers can also see the ball moving down the field. So I go back to say that, Desmond, your point in Central Street has always been one straight up intentional, will work with you. He will sit with you. He will ask for your advice, information. That's where we come together. And then we outline it at the policy level so that in both, right? So if we're talking about adult use from a legalization and creating the framework for that program in the state of Pennsylvania, it should go hand in hand with a relief program that identifies those individuals that have been incarcerated, that have been arrested. What does that look like from expungement, pardon? Also, what does that look like from a wraparound service? When we do expungement clinics, the one thing I tell people is that's a blip in time, and you take people from, let me see what's on your record, let me see what's expungible, let's go through the process to get it off. But what we're not doing is looking at the holistic person. It's the wraparound services, and it's money for wraparound services, because services don't come free. And the fallacy is, we can do all this stuff, but where's the money going to come from to make it happen? And so I think my mantra and my marching orders is also identify resources that can wrap around services around individuals, to Kristal's point, that can help to get them to a path of redemption. It's not even redemption, but giving them that chance to kind of breathe again and feel like that pressure that you've been carrying for these years, you're seeing some type of relief.
And Mr. Seaburg, your thoughts, the harm healing that for me needs to be done before we talk about the economic opportunity of it all.
Yeah, I think back to one organization that I've been really following is the Cannabis Health Equity Movement, led by people like Dashida Dawson, the new lead of the Cannabis NYC group, as well as Dr. Rachel Knox and several other really influential leaders throughout the industry. They have a kind of 3-pillar system where it's ending harm, preventing harm, and repairing harm. And I think in this part of the conversation, it's really important that we end the harm. We are stopping arrests. We are preventing harm by creating a new system where we can allow people to get into the industry, where we can create an environment where we can educate people on proper use. But at the same time, when we talk about ending harm and preventing harm, the biggest thing, and going back to Roz's point about wraparound services, the barriers that people face once they have a record are just absolutely immeasurable. You have barriers to public housing, you have barriers to education, and mainly getting education funding is a huge opportunity for people that if we can get people's records clear, not just get people out of jail, certainly that's priority number one. Getting people out of jail is number one. Number two is then getting them a life worth living that gives them purpose, that allows them to continue to be, or to get back to being a productive member of society, where this useless cannabis charge that is completely unequal in terms of how the law has been applied is something that needs to be done away with completely, but also getting people on that right path and helping them to it. At least for this part of the conversation, the ending and preventing of harm, that's really paramount for me. Repairing harm is certainly where I kind of feel the biggest work really needs to be done. People can kind of see and understand that we need to stop arrests and that we need to provide people with meaningful opportunities moving forward. It's about how we do that next step for me that is really kind of lacking in a lot of states that have legalized and have set up these systems, where even in Pennsylvania now, where multi-state operators are really running roughshod over the marketplace. They're jacking up prices for patients. They're creating marketplaces where small business owners, particularly people from Black and brown communities, cannot participate. And that's kind of where I see the biggest need being moving forward.
So before we jump into that aspect of the conversation, I want to stay in this justice space for a little bit of time, because and if you're able, any of you who may be able, give us a picture of how impactful this issue around incarceration or charges related to marijuana or cannabis offenses is, both at the entry point, but an area in my work where I find it also as impactful is I work in reentry and recidivism. So there might be people who are charged with one offense that has nothing to do with cannabis, but if they show up with a hot urine or a test, it violates their parole, and so they can end up back in jail. The original charge is not marijuana related, but their violation of parole or probation is that. How big of an issue, how much of this impacts Black Pennsylvanians, Black Philadelphians in particular? Any of you can give us some insight as to the scope and scale of this issue?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying, firstly, I believe African Americans in Pennsylvania make up about between 11 and 13% of the population. They make up at least around 45% of the incarceration population, possibly more than that. So that's an outsized representation for a group that's, barely a little bit above 10%. It is also true that a great deal of those who recidivate, and the levels are high in terms of recidivation, which means for those listening, going back after release, probably within 2 to 3 years of release. But the levels are high for, like you said, these technical parole violations, these hot urine samples or whatever else, not actually committing new crimes, just having a hot urine sample, having proximity to police. We all know Meek Mill got points because he actually broke up a fight where police were called, and that counted as contact with police. So look, the criminal justice system in Pennsylvania is imperfect. Like in a lot of places, a lot of work has to be done. Obviously, adult use restorative justice is a part of that. Fixing our parole system and our technical parole violations is a part of that. That's a part of the work we do. The senator sits on the Sentencing Commission, where a lot of this happens. A lot of people don't know there's a Sentencing Commission in Pennsylvania, which provides guidelines for judges of what to do and how to sentence people and how to, how many years to give them. And there's a need for people that look like us in those rooms. Senators is one of those people. I represent him when need be as a staff representation on the Sentencing Commission. We talk about parole, we talk about technical parole, we talk about cannabis. We've been active in trying to get folks to engage in the expedited clemency process for cannabis. So, it is an issue for our community, and that's why it's so critical that this inevitable thing that is going to happen, which is adult use in Pennsylvania, happens in the right way. It's critical that not only those who are obviously impacted by the war on drugs, but just regular Black and brown communities, entrepreneurs, people who may want to start a business, people who probably never even thought about starting a business. Right. It's critical that all of those people are part of the discussion, all of those people are at the table, and not just there to, to watch other people eat.
So let me ask someone who might be able to help me. I'll come from a family where I have a parent who was suffering some pain issues, and before there was such thing as the medical marijuana card and license, was convinced to use marijuana for treatment purpose, and then subsequently for a hot urine lost her job. So we don't talk. She didn't end up in jail, but I would like to know whether that's also a thing, because we rarely talk about that. There are people who have lost their jobs because of this thing that now might become legal, and other people make billions of dollars from. How big an issue is that in scope and scale as well? That might fly under the radar because it doesn't end in incarceration or anything like that, but. I know of a personal story. Is that an issue as well? People who've been punitively dealt with in their remedy because of their use of medical marijuana for any reason.
Absolutely.
Well, that was an issue. So that's been an issue not only prior to legalization, but that's still an issue now that we have the medical marijuana programs, where employee rights and workforce protection is an issue that has to be dealt on the policy side as well. Because unfortunately, sometimes when you have these programs roll out, we don't think about the collateral damage of someone that is a patient who then has to go take a urine test. And if I'm a patient and this is my medicine, why am I getting penalized because I end up testing positive for a substance that's legal? And so those where you have to square those two type of conversations up with policymakers. And this is why, going back to Desmond's point, that when you are a policymaker and working for a policymaker, having conversation with advocates that talk to patients and patients alike, it works really well because we can give you those examples so that you can figure out how do we write language that will mitigate that from happening, right? And so if you think about it, going back to your point regarding the impact, in 2022, in 2022, there were over 13,000 arrests for simple possession. You had out of that 13,000, 61% were white, 38% were Black. However, the population of Pennsylvania is on 11%. So you go back, you have to look at, again, where is this happening? Is it still a search and seizure? Why is it happening? It's still from a per capita, for the numbers from a demographic, is totally skewed, where it is definitely our community is still being plagued with disproportionate arrests and incarceration. And that is a deep dive. And you go back and you say, how do you do it? How do you deal with it? Well, we have to stop the harm. The harm is, why are we still arresting people for possession? Period, right? And that goes back to that point. And then you can then go and figure out how you create solutions from there.
So I want to talk about the economics of this, the political economics, actually, of the moment that we're in. Shift gears a little bit. And when I first, and this has been decades in conversation about the potential of legalizing cannabis, right? So two anecdotes. I was in Jamaica a few years back talking to some of the brothers who at that time were suppliers of what we call marijuana into the United States and other places, right? And they were highly concerned about the legalization and the impact it would have on the traditional way we got our weed, particularly the medical side, because then it creates these regulations that they felt would make their weed non-needed, for lack of, in other words, the way they grow the weed and the normal reasons people use weed, if you get the medical industry involved, it's going to disenfranchise them out of the marketplace. That was one aspect of it. Then the other aspect for me is I began to look back to these three industries: tobacco, alcohol, and the lottery, that in many ways, whether we like to claim it or not, were wealth creation vehicles for black people, particularly down south and up north in our communities. Like before prohibition and before the regulation and legalization of these economies, these were wealth creators in the black community already. And then it got legalized, it became official, it got regulated, and now not so much. They're not the, so, as a matter of fact, in many ways, these things now harm the black community in many adverse public health ways. I need you all to convince me how this product called cannabis will be different from the way that tobacco, alcohol, and the lottery, among many other economic products, have been handled in the past for black people. How do we legislatively and politically protect ourselves as this state is moving into what will become a boom economy around this product and service we call cannabis? Jim Seaburg, start us off.
Well, I think unless advocates like us on this panel step up and do something, it won't be different. Right now, what we're seeing in states, originally starting off in Massachusetts, we had Shalene Title about a year ago on our speaker series at Drexel, and she was one of the original commissioners of the Massachusetts program when it first came out, and everyone thought that we needed to use a limited license system to create equity within it, so that we were providing these licenses to people who are adversely impacted by the war on drugs. And what ended up happening was that licenses, these applications were fixed in a certain way where they may have one person of color on the ownership group to qualify as a social equity applicant. There are all these different loopholes that you can find within it. And really what we've been seeing, and Shalene now runs a center called the Parabola Center out of, I believe out of Ohio State, has been producing all these kind of guidelines, regulatory guidelines. She's part of the Cannabis Regulators of Color group, and they have come up with a lot of great ideas in terms of New York's idea of having people who have something on their record, a cannabis charge on their record, being the first to receive licenses, being able to put license or put antitrust or anti-monopoly protections within a bill, where say a certain company cannot own one company cannot own over a certain percentage of the marketplace. Doing that to be able to protect small business. We've also had conversations recently with people from the California Cannabis Manufacturers Association, who have talked about really creating mentorship programs for people looking to get within the industry, helping people out navigating testing and regulating, because there are some product safety concerns. Cannabis is a kind of a soil cleanser, so if there are hard metals such as lead or mercury or arsenic, it can be sucked up into the plant, and then whatever you are consuming, that can potentially present a harm as well. So giving people mentorship of how to deal with those regulations, how to create small business incubators where people can go for testing solutions, where you can have your business be able to thrive within that economy, providing support systems beyond just funding. Certainly funding is the number one, but how do we kind of give that holistic support to those businesses? And then as well, talking about how you have these licenses, or if you do have a license, certain states have put in provisions where you can't sell those licenses. And if you're a business owner, as a right, a generational wealth building opportunity could be you selling that license for $5, $10, $15, $20 million, and talking about how we can kind of ensure that. But I think going back to your original question of how do we ensure that the legacy market and the traditional market, about how the cannabis industry has thrived over the past 70 years through prohibition, I think it needs to be that kind of collaborative grassroots process of talking to advocates and making sure that we are providing businesses with the support in a similar way that we're providing returning citizens support as well.
Appreciate that. Ms. McCarthy, I'm curious as to your thoughts. How do we prevent, I think about tobacco, alcohol, lottery, farming in general, right? All of these things were wealth creation vehicles in our community. And I think this cannabis industry incorporates a lot of those elements, right? You know, the lottery representing the vice side of things. You need the ground and soil, so there's going to be a lot. This is an agricultural product, but it also has its medicinal and recreational usages. And I'm just saying the track record of black people faring well in these systems once they become official and regulated has not been great historically. How do we protect and prevent that this time around?
So the reality of is what you're saying is correct, and the way that we're going, if we don't figure out how to fix it, it's going to be the same for cannabis. And I'm not going to sit up here and sugarcoat it and tell you that we got all this opportunity and it's going to be different, because that's why I'm here in DC right now, because we have it started out with states identifying that we need to create an opportunity for legacy operators to be in the industry. Social equity was born, right? Social equity created this policy paradigm opportunity that was supposed to put in place where these operators from the legacy market have a chance to be in a regulated market and be able to, pardon me, to have a fair playing ground to be successful. Unfortunately, that has not happened, and a lot of it's due to the fact that we have an industry and that's so compliance-driven, so heavily regulated, that the cost to do business and the cost to exist as an operator is so prohibitive, and the lack of access to capital is so bad that it is almost impossible to go and level the playing field. So in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, do I ever think it'll be an equal playing field? No, because it is. We are currently in a marathon, and black and brown operators that are coming from the legacy market and the regulated market are still at the starting line, right. And the operators that are at the 7 mile marker. There's only 26 miles in a marathon. Therefore, if you got 7 miles ahead of everybody else, the reality that we're going to see a fair. But I will say this, being forever the optimist, I've never seen an industry that has been so committed from and maybe it's committed by just word of mouth or talking about it, or it's just the advocates, or it's the folks that are like the Dashida Dawsons and like, Shailene Titles that are like, we're not going to make this industry look like tobacco or look like lottery. Okay. And so if that's the ray of hope, the optimist in me is saying that we have people that are holding this industry accountable to create fair opportunity. Will it ever be equal? No. But do I think it'll be different than what we see with those other industries? Absolutely. As well as alcohol? Absolutely. But we're at a crisis point right now. If we don't get some dollars, access to capital into the marketplace, and to be able to create that resource for these operators to get up and going, we will not be able to see the promise of this opportunity called social equity.
So what I would like to do before Kristal Bush and Desmond McKinson answers, I would like you to incorporate into your answers how Pennsylvania is preempting making the same mistakes that other states have made, particularly since Pennsylvania has not yet legalized the recreational side of things, which is probably where a lot of the economic opportunity and differentiation comes into play. So what are the things that are on the table right now from a political policy perspective that Pennsylvania is considering to address the concerns that have been stated about displacement from the previous types of markets and opportunities that black people have gotten displaced from? What's going on in these conversations, in the advocacy right now to make sure we don't end up doing the same old? Let's go to you, Kristal.
Well, I just want to take a step back. Not everyone, honestly, that was impacted wants a license or a dispensary. I think when we look at the social equity, it's just like, oh, if you were impacted, you get this license or you get this dispensary. I know my father, he was locked up and he served 25 years, but not for cannabis, but he's tired. He don't want a dispensary, but how can we still compensate him? I think we got to really just change the framework and understanding that one is a level of fear that our community is facing. Our community is still scared of this. They're even scared to get their medical marijuana card.
Right.
So the same way how that DARE program was inside of our schools and educating the students on how this was a bad thing, we need a nationwide campaign that will educate, us on a large scale. So I think that's how we can start working, because a lot of us advocates, we can do a lot of the work, but even when I go into these communities, they're looking at me like, oh no, I can't touch this. I can't smoke this. I can't be around this, because they're still fearful of this. So we need a large scale of education or some sort of campaign, the same way how COVID was played out. It was like, okay, COVID, this is this public health issue. I think we need to start addressing this as a public health issue and really start compensating people. Hey, if you were a grandma and you were impacted, then you get $1,500. If you were a child and your parent was locked up, you get $2,500. Not everyone wants a dispensary,
right?
And I think that's what we're thinking, that okay, if you were locked up for this, then you get a license or you get a dispensary. And I think we got to really just change that framework, because that's what I'm hearing as I'm doing the community building. A lot of people that's on the legacy side, they don't want to come and be on the legal side. And why should they?
Right.
Why should they? They've been operating and feeding their family the way that they've done for years. Why should they come into this industry when they're scared and they've been criminalized for it? So I think we really got to put together some sort of like campaign that's just like really just nationwide, that really just have the same rules and the same rubric that the people that's in the community can take to, because if not, we're just going to be preaching to the choir, and no one is really going to like feed in and think that this is a industry that they can be a part of. Gotcha. So I would definitely just start with just the advocates and all of us just really just organizing one centralized campaign that we can really take to the president and take to different like politicians, so we can really get some reparations, and not just advocating for a license, because I know people who don't even want a license. I know people who have, this is a war on drugs. People have not survived this war. We are not even taking into account the people who have died from the collateral consequences of this. Yep. So how are we even repaying them? So we got to even take it a step deeper than the licenses and the dispensaries. Like, it's a war. People died. Yep. So let's even start figuring out how many people died from this war.
Very, very important point. That, again, that harm versus healing, and I'm glad you used the word reparations, because in the hour preceding that, I was saying to people that when we've had this conversation, the word reparation comes up a lot. And, so from that framework, as we shift to the policy side, Mr. McKinson, representing Senator Street, how is this playing out politically? We have two dynamics, in my opinion. Many dynamics, but two important ones for me. The move from Pennsylvania as a medical state to a forthcoming recreation state. And when I listen to you talk, it sounds like that's a done deal. It's just a matter of the timing of it. So given that it's a done deal and it's happening, what's being considered from a policy perspective, particularly the protections and the privileges that can inure to particular populations in this process? How is that being discussed at this point in the game?
Well, first, let me, I want to address Kristal real quick in that she's right. Restorative justice can look different. It doesn't have to be dispensary or a license for ABC or whatever else. Let me just answer broadly. It matters what kind of bill you write. Point blank, period. It matters who's writing the bill and what's going to be in the bill. And it's very critical, too, by the way, that the Democrats are in the majority in the House. 10-1, the bill is going to come out of the House. We have a really good bill in the Senate for Senator Street, where we've considered all the things that we've talked about today. That's because we're talking to all the people like Sharon Perry Thomas, right? Like, Roz, all the people on the ground doing the work. One thing I'll tell you is, restorative justice looks, can be diverse. And so our bill specifically talk about the people who died from the war on drugs. Like, our bill specifically isn't just going to be, well, can you prove that you yourself as an individual was impacted, like as a first person basis. No, I mean, if you can prove that there's legacy impact, if you can prove that there's familial impact, right? It'll give you an advantage when it comes to social equity licenses, which is a part of our bill. When we talk about the blackface shell game, right? Like having a black person and then you transfer the license or whatever else. In our bill specifically, if you wanted to do that within 5 years of having that license and you're not transferring it to another person who fits that status, that economic equality status as being impacted, then there is a penalty, a fee that you must pay.
But if I'm making millions and billions, sometimes that fee is incidental. I mean, we live in Philly. Philly's known for the blackface business game. Like we did it with the bars. We do it with a lot of things.
And I hear you. There's so much we can do, but that's why we're talking to people and considering, okay, what does that fee look like?
Right.
I mean, maybe that fee has to be 50% of whatever your entire profits have been.
All right. I'll listen to that one.
Crazy. I'm just saying, this is why it's critical to be talking to you. This is why it's critical to talk to Kristal, Sherelle, and Perry Thomas, Tauhid, all these people, because we need to make it in such a way that it benefits everybody, including those most adversely affected by our history of the war drugs in this country.
Got you.
But as far as your question in terms of the medicinal market that already exists, there will be consideration for those who already have medicinal licenses to preserve the infrastructure that already exists. Right? It's not going to be like we do this thing and we don't consider what the medicinal quarter has in terms of price and in terms of product or whatever else, and we're just doing it willy-nilly, blind to the infrastructure that already exists and is in place. So again, it comes down to the type of bill you write. All this is just in Senator Street's bill.
Right.
Right?
Okay.
The hope is whatever comes out of the House, maybe we make a bill, maybe we amend and change. And it's like, it's a very diverse process. But what's critical is making sure that stakeholders are at the table talking to these elected officials, and that whatever bill comes out is the bill that best serves our community.
Let me ask you before we move on from you, how? What's the how of what you just said? Because oftentimes, like I'm not in an advocacy group pro or con it, but this issue of getting people at the table, into the conversation, getting listened to, how do we make that practical?
Okay, so what we're doing is this. What Senator Street is doing is this. Specifically, we have a cannabis working group, right? We're talking to different people in the community, whether it's people in the Black and brown community who are focused on restorative justice, whether it's firefighters, right, who are focused on the issues they've had around medicinal use and how it impacts them, whether it's small business owners who want to make sure that they're not forgotten about, whether it's farmers who want to make sure that they can cultivate, they can get a cultivating license and aren't priced out. And we're talking to all these people to inform the policy and inform the legislation. There are other people in the House, Rep. Frankel is working on this. There are other supporters of adult use like Jordan Harris, Steve McKenzie. It's critical that their communities are talking to them because the House is going to be moving this bill.
Gotcha.
I would bet money that the bill comes out of the House first. And I will tell you with a lot of confidence, not 100% certainty, but a lot of confidence that the bill likely gets done this session.
I was going to ask you this session or which session, so you answer. Thank you. This
session is twofold. So it's 2023 and 2024 session is a two-part piece. It likely gets done by this session, right? So we got to be talking to people now. This conversation is critical. And plugging into your elected officials and connecting with people like myself or whatever is critical in making sure we get it right, because it's gonna happen. It's happening.
So in that spirit, what I want to do as we sign off and wrap up, I want to come to each of you and ask you this question, but give you probably a 2-minute window, 3 minutes at the most to answer it. And that is, if we stay on the track we're on, if things stay the same, your biggest concern is what? And then what is your remedy to that concern? So if things stay the same and go the way it's going now, your biggest concern is what? And when I say biggest concern, I'm talking about biggest concern for Black people. is what, and then what is your remedy to your concern? Let's start with you, Roz McCarthy.
Sorry. Yes, I'm here. First, that's a loaded question. I want to just tell you. So I will not be able to address everything. And also, it's a thoughtful question. It's a great question. It's a thoughtful question. And I want to go like really quickly and just recommend someone like yourself that is very obvious that you're thinking through this, and you're thinking through it through a lens that's not cannabis, that's not a lawmaker, but just as an everyday citizen that has in the community, that loves your community and loves Black people. You need to reach out to, and I encourage folks to reach out to Senator Street, find your house rep, and let them know, I want to weigh in. I have questions about the cannabis legalization bill. I want to make sure my community is not left out. So I really want to encourage that, because oftentimes we see people that talk about it, and we have this type of forum, and you walk away, and then this is what I do 24/7. So, but I don't know it all, right? And so I need people like yourself to answer your question. If it's an economic play for me, when it talks about achieving economics and being able to have and creating an impact and creating an economic change for our people. It starts with us being able to make sure that policy is in place for us, not only to be able to thrive and make sure that these the program, however, is whatever if an amendment passed, the infrastructure of the program has to support the end result of what you're trying to achieve. And we've seen in other states, and I don't want it to happen in Pennsylvania, where you've had great intention on providing relief and also providing opportunity for Black and brown people that want to be in this industry or who want to even touch it outside of on the ancillary side. However, when it came down to the rules and actually the execution of it, it was done piss poor, and literally the intentions did not match up with the work that was with the end result. And I've seen it in too many states. And if we keep on the same path, what we will do in the next 5 to 10 years, we will talk about, man, we had good intention. Man, that was a great idea. Man, I wish we got to create a fund. Right. We will regurgitate the same conversation. Next year on 420, we shouldn't be having the same conversation. And I'm on these panels quite a bit. But it is now time to talk about, okay, we know what the situation is. What do we activate and what do we do differently? And how do we put it into play and execute to make sure the end results are different?
Jim Seaburg, if we stay on this path, your concern is, and your remedy for your concern is?
Yeah, I completely agree with Roz that it has to be economic. And certainly with advocates being a driving force and certainly people who are interested in trying to help their community are going to be crucial in this. You see polls come out every single day that say 70% of Pennsylvanians support this, 70% of Americans support cannabis. But when you actually look down deeper into the data, you ask how much do they care about this? And cannabis doesn't even crack their top 20 in concerns usually when it comes to this. So that's a huge obstacle. But for my biggest concern is that we are going to see big tobacco, big alcohol, big pharma getting into the industry and really controlling it. That's going to cause a number of economic problems, whether that's from the generational wealth building opportunities that could be really reparational for the war on drugs, but as well as we talk about patient access as well too, consumer access, talking about people being able to get their medicine at reasonable prices. As we look towards making an adult use market, how do the adult use funds help with health insurance for medical patients who really truly do need this medicine and who can get off of, say, 10, 15 medications with cannabis under a guidance of their doctor. So I think it has to be economics. It has to be a system that is taking into account ownership within the industry, taking into account ownership within the auxiliary services within the industry, and then as well about like job training programs. What about trying to get people into beyond just becoming a dispensary agent making $15 an hour? How do we do it with real salaried jobs at every level from ownership on down?
Kristal Bush, if things stay the same, your biggest concern is and your remedy for that concern?
I feel like if things stay the same, what we're seeing, especially specifically in Philadelphia right now, the gun violence is at an all-time high. I like to say that the cannabis industry has an opportunity to create an economic that can create different programs that can go back into those communities to help with that. I think that we need more leaders that's not even in the industry to start speaking up. I speak to a lot of different, leaders that have a platform, but when I mention cannabis, they're so scared and they're just waiting for it to be legal. If they still sit around and they wait for this to be legal, it's going to be too late. And a lot of the times what we're seeing now is, get your kids, or, we're doing a lot of pointing of fingers. It's the legislators, it's the parents, it's the community members, and really, we really need everybody just from all walks of life, just all levels to really just come together and really support and support, the bill that Senator Street is putting in, and we need it now. I see a lot of people waiting, and they don't want to put it on their platform because they're too scared to speak out, about cannabis. I just see that we'll just see the increase in the gun violence, and all the violence is just going to continue to get worse, because what we're seeing, this was the intent that was supposed to happen. So yeah, I encourage everybody to, use their platform. And I thank you guys. I thank WURD Radio for allowing us, to be on your platform, to be speaking. And like Roz said, X420, we should not be having the same, conversation. We really need to be figuring out, okay, well, Kristal, you're on the ground, you had 300 people this year. How can we get you to 3,000 people to be mobilizing, and how can we really just start increasing in the support? We need the support, because we got to be able to sustain this. I've been in the industry for 4 years, and I feel like I've been 20, because it's forever changing, and we need that support so the leaders can continue to lead, especially leaders that have, organizations like M4MM and Women Grow and just different organizations that's just creating community. But those leaders need the support so we can sustain and continue to advocate, or else we're just going to continue to see the violence just increase.
Thank you for that wisdom.
Our last chance.
And Mr. McKinson, we got about 90 seconds, of 2 minutes at the most. If we keep on this pathway, your concerns and your remedy.
If we keep on this path, my biggest concern is, I know it's going to happen. My biggest concern is that it happens in a way that impacts Black and brown people positively across the board. I know that's vast, but I think about all the different issues we have about, like she said, gun violence, right? The funding, the recurring funding we need for a lot of the programs on the ground doing the work, like, Mothers in Charge and Every Murder is Real, and Yeah, Philly. That's real money that has to keep coming, and we got to figure out, we have some money now sitting there, but we have to find new ways of recurring funding for all the different things we know impact our community. Philadelphia is the largest, most impoverished city in America. We got a lot of problems. Gun violence is just one of them. Toxic schools, lead asbestos, all the different things we keep hearing people talk about. Cannabis is one of the ways in order to get this, in order to mitigate some of these things. And it's critical that we do it the right way, in the way that positively impacts our community. And empowers our community. And my way to do that is making sure we get the right bill done. Doing the best bill we can do in the Senate by connecting with the community, and then hoping that we move it through the Senate, or whatever comes through the House, we ensure mirrors that to the best of our ability.
I'd like to thank all of our participants in today's conversation, special broadcast, More Than Green, the Color of Cannabis. I'd like to thank Tayyib Smith. I'd like to thank Tauhid, Chappell, Roz McCarthy, founder, CEO of Minorities for Medical Marijuana, Kristal Bush, who runs FreeMyWeedMan and StayLyfted cannabis brands, and she's also the vice president of the Philadelphia CannaBusiness Association. Jim Seaburg, assistant director of Drexel's Medical Cannabis Research Center, and Desmond McKinson representing Senator Sharif Street. Don't forget to go to our website, www.wurdradio.com/420 for more information. And thank you to our sponsors, True Leave, for this exciting conversation. Coming up next, I actually don't know, but stay tuned for it anyway. Peace.